Stacy Lynn Harp is coaching with heart. Thank you for listening to this audio presentation. To learn more about Stacy and her coaching services, visit stacylharp.com. That's STACYL harp.com.
Welcome everybody to this edition of Coaching with Heart. Today we're going to look at the committed friends of Jesus. And I don't know about you, but this is this series that we're doing right now on friendship is really cool because I'm learning things I never even saw before. So I want to thank you for tuning in, and as always, you can go over to stacylharp.com if you want to see what other stuff we're offering over there. In fact, we have a brand new product, How to Deal with Depression. It's a teaching. It's almost an hour long that we put up over the weekend, and it's yours for a few dollars if you want to go over there and check it out and support what we're doing, because we need all the support we can get. We offer this to you as a ministry, but we do actually need the money. So if you see a product over there that you'd like and you want to get it, that will help us out for sure. But anyway, so today, now let's look at the friends of Jesus, the committed friends of Jesus. Now, I don't know about you, but when I was a little kid, I just always watched the popular people, totally watched them. And I always wondered, how did they do it? How did they get so many good friends or best friends? And I don't know about you, but I was in both categories as a kid. I had some really good friends that were my, quote, best friends, or BFFs. That's what we call them today. And I also was an outcast. And I always looked. I felt like an outsider, like, oh my gosh, I wonder if I'm ever going to get a really good friend or anything. And as I got older, and hopefully, if you're younger than me and you're hearing this, as you get older, you don't really care that much about having a million good friends. You just want one or two good friends. And I remember a friend of mine telling me not too long ago, well, actually, it was probably about 15, 20 years ago, actually. She said, you know what, Stacy, the older you get, the more you realize that if you have one or two good friends in your life, then you've been very, very blessed. And you know what? If our example is Jesus, then that holds true. Jesus had three really good, committed friends that he depended on. And those people were Peter, James, and John. And you might recall Peter was a hothead. And can you imagine Jesus having Peter as a best friend? But he did. He did. I totally identify with Peter, by the way. Foot and mouth syndrome. And yet this guy had faith. And ultimately we know from church history that he died a martyr for the faith that he had in Christ. And then there was James and John, who are the sons of Zebedee, which, by the way, we know more about John than we do James. There's really not a whole lot of interaction that we see between James and Christ, except we know that he was really a close friend of Jesus. John, we know, is the beloved. And often, we know John was there at the cross, and we know that John, this is the John that wrote the book of the Gospel of John, 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, and the book of Revelation. So we know John was, his uber BFF. But Peter, James, and John were Jesus's close friends. And what in the relationship of Christ with these three did Jesus do with them that he didn't do with other people? Well, let's look at some characteristics first, and then I'll share two examples of something Jesus did with the three of these men that he didn't do with the others. So some of the characteristics of a committed friendship are similar to the casual and the common friendships that we were looking at earlier, but for example, they made a commitment to spend quality time together. That might seem obvious, but, this meant that they actually spent time together. And we know if you read through the Gospels, you see that Peter, James, and John, they were there with Jesus during so many things. And so they spent quality time together. You might do that with your committed friends. Maybe you meet once a week, or maybe you have a girlfriend or a guy friend that you meet with you talk to them on the phone 2 or 3 times a day, or once or twice a week, or something. I know as a kid, I would always call my best friends after school. It's like, oh, hey, yay, I got the phone. I can go ahead and call my best friend on the phone, and talk 2 or 3 times a day. So they spent quality time together, not just quantity, but quality time. Your committed friends are people you also share things with. You share your goals, you share your joys, your sorrow. You know who you really are. You take the mask off. You let your guard down. You let people see what's really going on. And one of the key things about the committed relationship is that you have the freedom to offer correction and insight in that relationship to where that person might grow. And this is really what differentiates the different types of friendships between casual, close, and committed. In a close friendship, you can do this a lot. In a committed relationship, you can do it big time. And and it goes both ways. It's not just one person saying, hey, dude, you need to do this, blah, blah, blah. No, in a committed relationship, you know what, there's accountability and there's the freedom to offer correction. And hopefully, as that growth continues, as iron sharpens iron, one man sharpens another, everybody will see that growth and you all grow together. The relationship goes both ways. So here are 2 examples from the Bible that I want to tell you about, where Peter, James, and John spent time with Jesus in a committed best friend relationship where the others didn't. The first one you can find in the Gospel of Mark, chapter 14, verse 33, and also in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 17, verse 1. And here's basically what it says. It says, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, the brother of James, and led them up to a high mountain by themselves. He took Peter, James, and John along with them, and he began to be deeply distressed and troubled. So here we have an example of Jesus going up to the Mount of Transfiguration. And if you might recall that this is the area where he took Peter, James, and John, and he was literally transfigured in front of them, and then there was Moses and Elijah that appeared right there. And one of the guys said, hey, you know what, I could build you a temple. I mean, this is a intimate, very intimate example of a committed group of guys being with Jesus during one of the most coolest times of his life. And they were brought up because Jesus could trust them with his privacy and with his secret. And because he made sure to tell them, you know what, don't be telling people what happened here until after the resurrection. So that is one example of an intimate relationship with Jesus. In fact, let me read this to you, the actual account. This is from Matthew 17. It's in the NIV version. After 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, the brother of James, and led them up to a high mountain by themselves. There he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as the light. Just then there appeared before them Moses and Elijah talking with Jesus. Peter said to Jesus, Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. While he was still speaking, a bright cloud covered them, and a voice from the cloud said, This is my son, whom I love, and with him I am well pleased. Listen to him. When the disciples heard this, they fell face down to the ground, terrified. But Jesus came and touched them. Get up, he said. Do not be afraid. When they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus instructed them, Do not tell anyone what you've seen until the Son of Man has been raised from the dead. The disciples asked him, Why then do the teachers of the law say that Elijah must come first? And Jesus replied, To be sure, Elijah comes and will restore all things, but I tell you, Elijah has already come, and they did not recognize him, but have done to him everything they wished. In the same way, the Son of Man is going to suffer at their hands. Then the disciples understood that he was talking to them about John the Baptist. Okay, obviously we could get into a Bible study here, but for the sake of this is the one example of Jesus being with Peter, James, and John on the Mount of Transfiguration. And note here, go back into Matthew chapter 17 when you get some time, and look at the reaction of the disciples. These were men who were terrified, and they shared those very vulnerable feelings with Jesus during that time. Now here is another example of the time that Peter, James, and John also spent with Jesus. And for me, this is actually the place where I see, well, let me stutter here and say one thing. Jesus had needs at this point in Matthew 17. He had a need to show his friends that he was going to be glorified, right? And he needed somebody to witness that and see that, because there was the testimony that came from heaven. In the Garden of Gethsemane, which is the second example, we see Jesus really needing friends to be there with him during his time of sorrow. So Matthew chapter 26, beginning in verse 36, says this: Then Jesus went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to them, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." He took Peter and the two sons of Zebedee along with him, and he began to be sorrowful and troubled. Now, who were those two sons of Zebedee? James and John. Okay, remember? Okay. Verse 38, Then he said to them, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me." Going a little farther, he fell on his face to the ground and prayed, "My Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me, yet not as I will, but as you will." Then he turned to his disciples, and he found them sleeping. So Peter, James, and John fell asleep. And Jesus says, "Couldn't you men keep watch with me for 1 hour?" He asked Peter. "Watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak." He went away a second time and prayed, "My Father, if it's not possible for this cup to be taken away unless I drink it, may your will be done." When he came back again, he found them sleeping because their eyes were heavy. So he left them and went away once more and prayed the third time, saying the same thing. Then he returned to the disciples and said to them, "Are you still sleeping and resting? Look, the hour has come, and the Son of Man is delivered into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us go. Here comes my betrayer." There's so much in this. Again, this isn't a Bible study that we're doing here. This is just an example of a time where Jesus took his three BFFs, Peter, James, and John, because he was in need. He needed them to be there while he prayed in this great, great time of sorrow and trouble. Even Jesus needed support during that time. And he got it, in part. And ultimately, as you read the Gospels, you'll kind of see how the committed friends of Jesus ultimately all died for him, with the exception of John, who actually died as an old man. But he did suffer persecution for his love for Christ. So there's a lot we can learn from the committed friendships of Christ. And so today, as you consider those friends that you have, consider the things that we've talked about.
Thank you for listening to this audio presentation. To discover more resources from Stacy Lynn Harp, clinically trained marriage and family therapist and biblical coach, visit stacyLharp.com. That's STACYL Harp.com. Coaching with Heart.